Hi, this is Rich Eiler with the North Point Group. Today I'm going to discuss personal bias and what we call KEP, K-E-P, knowledge, experience, and performance. One's knowledge and experience can provide invaluable insight for executive decision making as well as to the biases that can lead the enterprise to significant failures. The key to achieving positive outcomes when considering new product or service offerings, investments, divestitures, and/or acquisitions is the understanding of the KEP, knowledge, experience, and performance required to support the decision process, as well as the elements of KEP that are missing. Two questions arise. What required KEP exists and what required KEP is missing? Having addressed the KEP status, how does one obtain the data, information, and knowledge that are required to improve the quality and precision of management decisions? Now, let's take a look at personal bias. Is it an asset and/or a liability? Let's use the smartphone market as an example of where management decisions were made that impacted the profitability and existence of organizations, including the main competitive suppliers of BlackBerry, Apple, Samsung, Nokia, Microsoft, and Hewlett-Packard. As we look at the organizations that did not achieve and sustain success, personal bias was the leading characteristic. The arrogance to say, we know what consumers want, and if we build it, they will buy it, was prominent. The organizations with the failed offerings believed they knew what the consumers wanted and needed. Now, think back a decade when BlackBerry dominated the mobile device market with significant market share. As changes in the market occurred, with a shift of mobile phones to handheld computers with internet access, what steps did BlackBerry take to adapt to the changing market? Did BlackBerry have the KEP, knowledge, experience, and performance to identify the unmet and unidentified needs of the market? Or did personal bias and the arrogance dictate their market response? Did the BlackBerry organization have the culture and a process to identify the problem, the root causes of the problem, and then the solution to address their issue? Since history shows that BlackBerry lost significant market share, then BlackBerry must have lacked the KEP, the processes to understand unmet and unidentified needs, and/or allow personal bias and arrogance to dictate their market responses. Now, let's look at Apple. They made the decision to require all Apple users to live and work in their operating environment, while Samsung adopted the Android operating system in designing their smart mobile devices. Were these decisions based on bias, arrogance, or on a process that identified the unmet and unidentified needs of the market? In Samsung's case, their personal bias was to validate the unmet needs and educate the potential buyers on the unidentified needs in the Android environment. This knowledge was an asset, not a liability. We now know which of these organizations have the processes in place to identify the missing KEP and use these processes to obtain the required data, information, and knowledge that therefore supported their bias with knowledge, turning the bias into an asset. Obviously, having the required knowledge also assists in identifying the risks to mitigate and the risks that can be leveraged into economic value. So, how is personal bias impacting business decision making? Let's look at a few examples. Startup companies. Based on research of 67 startup companies where the initial product and/or service offerings were successful, personal bias of the founder actually enabled success. However, the second product and/or service release that followed the initial offering failed for all 67 companies over a 26 to 31 month period of time. Why did the second offering fail? Research indicates that instead of utilizing a process to identify the unmet and unidentified needs of the market, the founder's personal bias dictated the content of the failed second release. Now, let's look at an acquisition example. Examples abound of failed acquisitions to meet key objectives such as revenue targets. Industry pundits identify a 70% failure rate. Did the acquiring organization understand the market, the offerings, and the revenue channels? Did the acquiring organization have a process to capture the realizable revenue of the offerings in the market channels? Or was the KEP overshadowed by internal bias? Was the integration and execution successful in identifying the knowledge of the specific cultures as well as the customer base, or did biases and ego drive the acquisition and integration objectives? Now, let's take a look at an investment manager as an example. Investment managers face the same issues as product suppliers of not having and or utilizing a process for validating realizable revenue. Using revenue numbers from the past and assuming that future revenues will be similar is a highly risky process and more times than not results in serious error. In 41 investments and or acquisition process initiatives, the immediate performance to plan was at 61.4% of the expected revenue, and ultimately more than 45% of the investments failed. So, the wisdom of having and using a process. Having a process to identify the KEP that exists to support the critical decisions and identify the missing KEP is a required asset. Additionally, the process needs to incorporate the ability to identify the unmet and unidentified needs of the organization, markets, channels, and current customers, new buyers. Combining KEP with instinct, personal bias, is proven to lead to more precise decisions that positively impact performance. Those executives continuing to achieve improved performance within their organizations have found that depending on personal bias alone is not a formula for success. On the other hand, personal bias that is driven by ego and political needs can lead to stunning disasters. Personal bias is about learning and being constantly open to new and even conflicting ideas, facts, and knowledge that is validated for its accuracy. Then, and only then, can personal bias, sprinkled with determination, become a significant asset. Thanks for your attention today. If you have any questions, please go to the Northpoint website, www.thenorthpointgroup.net, and or you can contact me, Rich Eiler, at northpoint.rich@gmail.com.